Good morning. Well, it's morning where I am. It may be afternoon where you are, whatever time it is. Hello and welcome to our Fiveable Cram stream for AP World History today. I am Melissa and I'm back again with you this week for our stream. I'm glad to be here. See a number of folks in the chat saying hi and welcoming each other this morning, which is awesome. I just want to open up our lesson today with a poll. Got a question for you. So I want to know, what is the best treat after a hard workout or a hard test, or anytime you just need to treat yourself a little bit? I know there could be many choices, but I can only hit 4 in my poll. So I want to know your favorite treat for yourself after you do something really hard. If you weren't on Discord when teachers were introducing themselves, or if we missed each other on that day, I am a runner and I am training for a super long race, and Saturdays are my long run days. So I have already been out for a long run today, and I'm curious, how should I treat myself after we get done with Fiveable, after I did a long run and a cram stream? If I need a little treat, what should I get? Ooh, we got some votes coming in. I think it's going to be no surprise to anybody. When we publish the results, here we go. And survey says best treat after a hard workout, hard test, hard anything is to get some sleep. So maybe I'll treat myself to a nap a little bit later today. And maybe you will as well, after working so hard, giving up time on your Saturday to do this cram stream with us. So let's jump in and get started, everybody. We are here today looking at Unit 1, if you are familiar with the College Board unit numbering system. But if you're not, and I noticed a lot of folks said last week or earlier this week when we had our first stream, people were like, I don't know the unit numbers. My teacher doesn't use them. That is totally okay. What we're looking at in today's stream is the first time period in AP World, which is 1200 to 1450 CE. And specifically, we're going to do kind of a whirlwind tour of key ideas in major world regions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we jump in. But Unit 1 is a big overview. So as we are going, I want to give you our heads up. Stream is being recorded. It may appear on Fiveable, on YouTube, or other public channels. Your Vimeo name will also appear, potentially if you ask a question. So if you are concerned about that, make sure that you're using a name that is going to allow you to feel safe and confident with what we are doing. If you are not already, you should definitely be following at Think Fiveable on the socials, because there is a lot of great content, a lot of reminders about dates of things, but also just really like encouraging, fun, awesome content, especially from our student creators. They do an amazing job on our social media. So follow us there if you are not already. Coming up soon. Today we got the Unit 1 stream, and then on the 9th, Clementine, I can't help you right now. I'm teaching the kids. My daughter, Clementine, is at the door, but she's going to go get help from somebody else, so we're fine. On the 9th, Mr. Beckman is going to be here for his first stream of this season. He's amazing, by the way. He's going to be talking Unit 2, which is all about trade and economics. I'll preview a little bit of that at the end of our stream today. On the 13th, I'll be back for Unit 3, and that's where we jump into the next time period, 1450 to 1750. The 18th will be Unit 4 in that same time period. And hey, Mr. Beckman is here in chat today. Awesome. So you're going to have 2 amazing people in chat answering your questions. And then, of course, ongoing conversations in Discord, which are amazing. Okay, today, big picture, here's where we go. I'm gonna give you a big idea concept to think about this first time period and this big world tour. In our world tour, I'm going to focus on vocabulary because I think that's one of the ways, if you're a person who's really struggling to remember all this content, pinning your knowledge to vocabulary can be really powerful. And I'm going to talk about the themes of continuity and innovation. As we are going, please jump in the chat and participate along with us. If you have questions about anything, Natalie, our amazing TA, is here and would love to give you answers. Mr. Beckman is here in chat. And then, of course, obviously, we've got a room full of super smart people in the chat who can help answer your questions, clarify things, restate things if I'm going a little bit too fast, which does sometimes happen. So use that chat, participate along with us, and let's get going. The big idea for this unit. If you were an AP World teacher and you were looking at this first time period, this first unit, you would see this phrase over and over and over again, which is that empires and states in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas, which is fancy College Board way of saying people everywhere, demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity in the 13th century. Now, as we jump into this, I want to just do a quick disclaimer. I am really going to be focusing on political, social, and cultural ideas with some economic and other themes being touched on. But because we have another stream on this same time period, that gives us an opportunity to focus on economic connections and content with our Unit 2 stream. So if you're like, Melissa, why aren't you talking about the Silk Roads? It's because Mr. Beckman's going to talk about the Silk Roads next week, but they are relevant to this same time period. So if the big idea is that these empires and states demonstrate continuity, innovation, and diversity, I want to just quickly define those terms so that we're all thinking on the same page. Continuity, hopefully this is a term that you have come across before, is a reminder to us that as history progresses, some things stay the same over time. They continue. And the continuities, this is why we did a Unit 0 stream on Monday, was to kind of get a baseline of some of the key ideas in different parts of the world that are going to continue into this first time period and continue even through this first time period and into later eras of world history. Innovation is a broad umbrella term that is going to talk to us about new ideas as well as new inventions. So innovation can be about making stuff, but innovation can also just be thinking new ideas, or it's the idea of change. So some things stay the same, other things change. And then diversity is a great reminder to us that not everyone is the same, even in the same region. In world history, we talk both about regions, which we covered in our Unit 0 stream, and we talk about specific states or countries. But even within countries or within small regions, there's going to be a lot of diversity. So as I'm talking today, I'm going to give you like big picture general trends. And when you think of an exception to those trends, that is awesome. That's a reminder to us that not everybody's doing things the same way. Couple of study suggestions as you are into your review of AP World, or as you're gearing up for your review of AP World. I'm a big fan of maps. I asked my students when I taught this in the fall to map out this unit, to actually create and color in a map that shows the different states and groups that we're going to talk about today. Freemanpedia has some beautiful maps online that I would highly recommend if you are wanting to do your own map of this first time period. But I love a map because it gives you on one page just a picture of what you should know. And for you visual learners out there, this can be really powerful. If you are taking notes along with me today, I'm a big chart person. So of course I would make a chart. We've got 6 regions that we're going to focus in on today. East Asia, Dar al-Islam, or the world of Islam. And I'll define that a little bit more when we get to them. South and Southeast Asia, which we're going to look at together because they share many similarities. The Americas, Africa, and Europe. So 6 regions and then 3 big ideas. What are the continuities that you hear or see us talk about today? What are the key changes or innovations? And where's the diversity? What are the exceptions that you know or that you hear in these different regions? All right, I hope you're ready to dive in because I am ready with our first region. We're going to take East Asia first. And I want to give you 4 big kind of vocab terms to think about. And then for each one, I'll talk about some of the specific ideas around those. So one of the big ideas in East Asia is the continuity, the persistence, and the significance of Confucianism. We talked about Confucianism as a belief system in the Unit 0 stream. And so if you didn't get to watch that, I would encourage you, when you've got some time, to jump back into that replay and watch the section at least on Confucianism. But Confucianism, of course, predates our first units, and is significant in Chinese culture, Chinese government. And as we get into this 13th century time period, we see the blending of Confucianism with ideas from Buddhism, ideas from Taoism, new ideas coming into China. And so you often hear the term Neo-Confucianism, New Confucianism in the 13th century in China. But this belief system continues to form the backbone of Chinese culture and Chinese politics. The belief in unequal relationships and the importance of people knowing their place, the importance of education, and the continued use of the examination system based on the Confucian classics to determine jobs in the imperial bureaucracy. These are the continuities of Confucianism that remain really important in East Asia broadly and in China specifically. China's influence is a big theme both before and during the 13th century. China had a big role to play on the East Asian stage. And so we see Chinese cultural traditions influencing its neighbors. Broadly throughout East Asia, we see the importance of family and filial piety, which we talked about in the Unit 0 stream with Confucianism, the respect for and honoring of family members, parents and ancestors both. So this filial piety is significant in East Asia because the influence of Neo-Confucianism, what spread beyond China's borders into places like Korea and Japan. Buddhism spread through China into both Korea, Japan, and also into Southeast Asia as well. China's influence included social expectations as well, Chinese gender roles and the Confucian-rooted traditions of respect for women, but also the expectation of deference and humility from women spread beyond China's borders into other regions. And then beyond the religious aspects and social aspects, Chinese literary and scholarly traditions spread beyond China's borders as well. So you may know that the language and writing structures in both Korea and Japan are rooted in Chinese written language, but even literary forms or the traditions of scholarship and the importance of history and education spread from China to its neighbors. And this was done in no small part by our third big vocab term, for East Asia, the Song Dynasty. The Song Dynasty are the big dynasty during this time period in China. The Song are some of the wealthiest, the most innovative, the strongest, right, dynasties really worldwide during this time. There's this huge shadow cast by the Song Dynasty. And so thinking about what you know about China and the Song Dynasty, good thing to do in this unit. And then our fourth, a big piece of the Song influence is the economic innovation. The economy of Song China was hugely significant. It flourished as a result of increasing production, expanding trade networks, as well as specific innovations in agriculture and manufacturing. So folks in the chat are a little quiet today. Definitely would encourage you to jump in. Can you tell me what are some of the major innovations, developments, improvements that you know about in Song China? Because if I start reading them off, I guarantee you're all going to go, oh, I knew that. So I was giving you a chance to be first. Yes, the canals, transportation innovations like the expansion of the Grand Canal, a big improvement undertaken by the Song Dynasty. Gunpowder isn't a new technology in the 13th century, but certainly is being utilized and expanded on. The civil service exam is a continuity. We've got compasses and navigation. Yes, these are all awesome. Don't forget about steel and iron production under the Song Dynasty that allow them to create tools that allow them to create and innovate in other areas as well. Textiles, silk, for example, porcelain, right? Luxury goods being produced and traded from China. And then environmentally, we want to think about champa rice. Champa rice is a hardy strain of rice that's actually from Southeast Asia, but that was adopted by the Southern Song and then spread throughout East Asia, which allow the Song Dynasty to support a growing population. And if you can feed everybody, that allows people to focus then on other innovations and ideas. Got a question in the chat. What would go under the diversity part of the notes chart? So if you're thinking about exceptions to any of these trends or ideas, so that could go in the diversity part. So noticing, right, areas where Chinese influence is really strong, but also thinking about what do you know about Korea or about Japan in particular that are different from China, but still relevant to East Asia. Okay, I got a little quiz for you, and I'm trying to keep this as like AP as possible. So each of our little mini quizzes today is going to have a picture or a text to help get us thinking. So I've got a picture here from a probably somewhat, well, it is a famous Chinese artwork from the Song Dynasty, but maybe famous to some of you because I know some AP teachers love to use this particular piece of artwork in their classes. And so as you look at this piece of artwork, I want you to think about, does this image best show beliefs and practices of Confucianism? Does the image best show China's influence on other societies? Does it show the Song Dynasty? Does it best show economic innovation in East Asia? I'm going to hide that so you can look at it a little bit more closely. And once you've voted, could you give your rationale for why you picked your answer in the chat? So what do you think? Oh, getting some good votes. Getting some good votes. Okay, I'll give you about 10 more seconds to vote and start dropping your rationales in chat. And I'll show you. Bing! Here's how people voted. So 72% are saying, hey, this is really representing economic innovation. You may remember this rainbow bridge scroll from some of your classwork, or you may just have noted the bustling marketplace depicted in this image. I think it's also valid to think that this is best reflecting or showing life in the Song Dynasty, because of course that's when this image is from. Thinking about China's influence on other societies, sure, I can see that rationale there. I didn't pick this with a particular correct answer in mind, but definitely want to get you thinking about how these different ideas show up in practical terms in the documents created during that time period. Okay, let's jump into the next region, Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam. And geographically speaking, Dar al-Islam is expansive. It includes Middle Eastern civilizations like the Abbasid Caliphate, but it also includes any place where Islam spread and was widely adopted. And so we end up seeing Dar al-Islam cover parts of West Africa, North Africa, parts of Europe, especially in Spain, around the Mediterranean basin into the Middle East, as well as along the east coast of Africa, even into Central Asia and India, and then across the Indian Ocean into Southeast Asia. So this is a really expansive cultural region. This isn't so much a geographic region as it is a cultural region. But there are some general ideas that we can think about and the significance of Islam. We talked in the Unit 0 stream about some of the key beliefs and practices of Islam, but the thing that ties together this really diverse area of Afro-Eurasia is a shared belief and practice of Islam as the dominant religion. And this goes with a term that goes along with Islam, the Ummah, right? All Muslims together have a shared identity as Muslims that supersedes ethnic or racial or political identities is the idea behind this. Now, realistically, of course, people are still, even in Dar al-Islam, still identifying in other ways. And there's still a lot of difference amongst people in different regions because Islam wasn't even practiced the same way in every place. So another big idea in Dar al-Islam is just the idea of expansion, the expansion of Islam as a belief system, but also of Islamic states. So the expansion of Muslim rule. And we talked about in the Unit 0 stream that one of the ways Islam and other universal religions spread is through military expansion. And so as states expanded, as empires expanded, they brought Islamic ideals with them, not only to spread to the population, but to structure the way that they govern in some of those areas. Muslim rule continued to expand to many parts of Afro-Eurasia due to military expansion, but Islam also spread through the activities of merchants, missionaries, and the Sufi mystics, particularly in Southeast Asia. Early in this time period, we have a formerly powerful Islamic state in the Abbasid Caliphate, which was in its decline and then gradually fragmented so that new Islamic political entities emerged. So we have the continuity of Islamic states, but a change and innovation in new political entities like the Seljuk Empire, the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, the Delhi Sultanates in India, and as well as the adoption of Islam by leaders in places like West Africa, the Mali Empire, the leaders of the Mali Empire like Mansa Musa adopted Islam as their primary belief system. And as we look at Dar al-Islam, one of the kind of defining characteristics of this culturally connected but very diverse area of the world is just the intellectual innovation. Islam as a belief system values intellectual progress, intellectual study, and so there are really great examples of innovations and the spread of innovations in lots of different scholarly fields: mathematics, literature, medicine, even agriculture, the development of ideas, and then also the spread of these intellectual ideals. Muslim scholars were known for preserving and commenting on older scholarly texts like Greek moral and natural philosophy. There was a transfer of knowledge and innovations between Muslims and Christians in Spain, and in major cities and cultural centers throughout Dar al-Islam. There were often houses of scholarship, the House of Wisdom in Abbasid Baghdad, or universities and other scholarly institutions in places like Timbuktu in West Africa. And so this broad world of Islam encompasses shared cultural characteristics, but also the idea of religious and cultural syncretism. So there's a blending of ideas and a sharing of ideas across cultures and even from the past into the present. So continuity-wise, right, Islam develops long before the 13th century and continues as a major cultural feature. The expansion of Islam through military rule is a significant continuity. Innovations include both new political entities, the blending of Islam with local cultural practices in different parts of the world, as well as the intellectual innovations, ideas, developments, and the transfer of those ideas throughout this shared cultural space. So I've got for us this time a text to think about. I'm going to open up the poll on this text while I give you a chance to read it along with me. This is from Ibn Battuta's description of the court of the Mali Sultan from around 1350 CE. And Ibn Battuta says, among their good practices are their avoidance of injustice, their strict observance in praying, their perseverance in joining in the congregation and in compelling their children to do so. If a man does not come early to the mosque, he will not find a place to pray because of the dense crowd. It is customary for each man to send his servant with his prayer mat to spread it out in a place reserved for him until he goes to the mosque himself. They pay great attention to memorizing the Holy Quran. So as you're looking and thinking about that text, does it best show the beliefs and practices of Islam, the expansion of Muslim rule, intellectual innovations or intellectual transfers throughout Dar al-Islam? What do you think? I'm curious. And of course, once you voted, can you drop your rationale in the chat? All right. So I'm going to publish the results here, and a lot of folks picked up on a description of beliefs and practices of Islam, which I think is a very logical, straightforward connection to make with this text. The 5% of folks who picked up on this as the expansion of Muslim rule, I like that you made that connection, because for me, that was a place where my mind went when I looked at the source line of this text, right? Which is that Ibn Battuta is describing the court of the Sultan. So he's in the place where the ruler's influence is significant and where Islam is being practiced. And he's in Mali, which is in West Africa. So we see then the expansion of Muslim rule into completely new regions of the world beyond its origins on the Arabian Peninsula. Intellectual innovation and transfer, right? The transfer of the ideas of Islam have been brought to Mali. I can definitely see where people are thinking along those lines as well. These are all good thoughts to be having about this text. And this is the kind of thing that you're going to want to do for the exam. You're not going to be asked questions that are quite this straightforward, but you are going to be given texts or images that encourage you to think about, what do I know about the world that relates to this text or relates to this image? And that's what we're practicing with this today. Not so much can you get the right answer, but can you make a connection that is particularly relevant to this set of ideas. All right, I'm going to group South and Southeast Asia together, which isn't really fair because both of these are diverse and interesting regions in their own right. This is largely for the sake of time because there are some overlaps in the big ideas in this part of the world. So South Asia, if you remember from our Unit 0 talk on geography, includes Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, right? The Indian subcontinent is what we're thinking of in South Asia. And then Southeast Asia includes both mainland countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, but then also island regions like modern day Indonesia would be included in Southeast Asia. So 4 big ideas in South and Southeast Asia, a continuity of the influence and the beliefs and practices of Hinduism, of Buddhism, and of Islam in this region. Some specific vocabulary that you can think about. We have the mystic movement of the Bhakti in Hinduism. We also have a mystic movement in Islam, the Sufi movement. And thinking about Buddhism, we have the spread and the significance of a monastic tradition. So thinking about monasteries, monks, and nuns. And I didn't get to talk about this because we're running out of time with talking about Buddhism in Unit 0. So I'll mention it here. Monasticism is significant because it is the idea of people choosing to devote themselves and their lives to their religious tradition and to remove themselves from the social and economic expectations of their gender or class or society in general. And so monasticism reflects an opportunity sometimes for people to experience life in a different way because they are often giving up things like family or traditional economic responsibilities. They also are giving up then some of their ties to inheritance and wealth from a traditional social and economic order. But it presents an opportunity for some people to experience life in a different way. If we're thinking about innovation in South and Southeast Asia, we have a number of new states that emerge. I talked in Unit 0 about the fact that India largely was not politically or culturally unified. So we have a number of different states throughout India, including Majapahit. And we already identified with Dar al-Islam the Delhi Sultanate in northern India. So we've got diversity of belief and diversity of politics in India. In Southeast Asia, you may have learned about Srivijaya or about the Khmer Empire. These are two significant states in Southeast Asia that you would want to pay attention to. Looking at our time and trying to be respectful of everybody's time and get through everything that we are supposed to do today, I want to jump into our image this time and the poll that goes along with the image. So is this image best showing the influence of Hinduism, the influence of Buddhism, the influence of Islam, or the rise of new states in South and Southeast Asia? This one's probably the most subtle that I have given you. And if you're not sure, it's totally okay to guess. And as always, definitely want to see people's rationales in the chat as you're having ongoing conversation about what you're seeing, what you're thinking in this section of new learning. Okay, the votes are flying in. Let's give it about 10 more seconds. And I love that we ended up with a tie. And everything was really close. So a lot of folks are seeing the influence of Hinduism. You may have recognized this as the Hindu temple at Angkor Wat. You may also have known, because 23% of you suggested that this was the influence of Buddhism, you may know that this temple was converted to a Buddhist temple when Buddhism became more prominently practiced in the region. And then thinking about the rise of new states, this is really a splendid and beautiful piece of architecture that would have been sponsored and supported by the state rather than necessarily being built by private interests in this time period. So yeah, that's awesome. Very nice thinking, everybody. Love it. Okay, we are flying through info. Let's talk about the Americas. And this is one where we could get into the weeds with lots and lots of detail. And so I find, because this is such a huge geographic region, I find in terms of key vocab, the most helpful things to think about are actually the major subregions in the Americas that are particularly significant in the 13th century. And we don't want to forget North America, right? I think many of the AP World textbooks that I have seen focus so much of their energy and attention in Mesoamerica and in the Andes, which are both hugely important regions in the Americas and have large and flourishing urban or city-based civilizations. But we don't want to forget that North America was not a place of wandering bands of nomads, and that there were settled, urban, sophisticated civilizations throughout North America, in places like the Chaco Canyon in what is now New Mexico, Mesa Verde in what is now Colorado, Cahokia in the Mississippi Basin. And these cultures and civilizations had cast a significant shadow in their own subregions. In Mesoamerica, the decline of the Mayan city-states was kind of in its like last vestiges. So if we're thinking about continuities in Mesoamerica, we have the end of the Mayan culture, which mostly predates our particular course here, but we do still have remnants of that culture in Mesoamerica. But then also the rise of the Mexica, or later Aztec Empire in Mesoamerica. In the Andes Mountains, in this time period, we want to think about the Inca Empire. And then for each of these regions and each of these civilizations, it is worth knowing some detail. And some of this we will cover in more detail. I'm going to talk about the Aztec and the Inca when I talk about land-based empires. So I sound like, and I feel like I'm skimming the surface too shallowly today, and it's completely about time. But as you are thinking about the Americas, think about what you know about the political structure. So for example, in Mesoamerica, the Mayan city-states, one of the cultural legacies of the Maya is the continuation of city-states, where a city is the primary political unit rather than an empire that stretches and unifies people over a larger span. Then even the Aztec Empire is largely built off of those city-states that were unified together in tribute systems and militarily. In the Andes, the Inca are more similar to the land-based empires of Asia and Africa, for example, where it is more of a central authority unifying a large region geographically. And the Inca were particularly famous for building roads to connect all of the parts of their empire in order to retain both political and economic dominance in the region. In North America, the civilizations tended to be somewhat smaller, and they also tend to be lesser known, both in our textbooks, but also just our broad kind of cultural American understanding of world history, because of the transformation and the change in North America that we're going to see with the arrival of Europeans. Most civilizations in the Americas are culturally polytheistic. So we see an emphasis on multiple gods, or even some animistic traditions with the spirits of and the spiritual qualities of nature. Ancestor veneration is hugely important in these regions, and these are continuities from earlier civilizations into all of these regions. I also just want to preview and highlight a little bit something that I hope Mr. Beckman has time to talk about when he talks about the economics of this time period, which is the idea that in the Americas, rather than having large trade networks that span over multiple regions, most of the economic exchange in the Americas is much smaller and more regional. There isn't a singular American network, for example, that unifies people economically all the way from North America to the southern tip of Latin America. And looking at time, I'm going to skip over my sample question for this one because y'all are getting so good at this. But I do want to make sure that we get through everything with some good detail. So I want to talk about Africa. And I almost hate doing it like this because Africa is an enormously huge continent. And if we had time to zoom in on each of the smaller regions within Africa, we could probably do a whole stream on African history in this time period, because there is a lot happening and it's really easy to miss pieces. So I'm going to try and give you big picture vocabulary as well as some specific details that I think will be really helpful. So one thing to remember, and this is going back, we've already mentioned Africa when we talked about Dar al-Islam, but one significant development in Africa is the spread of Islam. And Islam spreads throughout North Africa, it spreads into West Africa, and it spreads along the Indian Ocean coast of East Africa. And Islam is widely spread and widely adopted, but not by everyone. Even in the regions where Islam kind of becomes a dominant cultural force, it wasn't adopted by everyone. The trend that we tend to see is Islam was adopted by elites who saw an opportunity to connect themselves to this bigger cultural network of Dar al-Islam. So, for example, kings and sultans throughout West Africa would adopt Islam, and we see kings and sultans in East Africa as well. In some parts of Africa, in North Africa, for example, more of the kind of common populace also adopted Islam. But for example, in West Africa, common people generally didn't. And this is a difference in terms of how Islam spread in different parts of the world. In the Middle East, in particular, we see that when Islam spreads, or when an Islamic empire expands its territory, people were given the opportunity to convert. And if they were monotheists, Jewish or Christian, they didn't necessarily have to convert to Islam, but could instead pay the jizya, or the tax, for keeping their own faith traditions. Polytheists, on the other hand, were offered the opportunity to convert or to be executed. And so large numbers of people from polytheistic civilizations in the Middle East converted to Islam in order to save their own lives. It doesn't seem that in West Africa, it was presented that starkly as Islam expanded into the region. And so while the rulers would adopt Islam, common people tended to keep their traditional practices and not even necessarily have to keep them in secret. And so this is why, if you're reading texts by travelers like Ibn Battuta, who was a Moroccan, a North African scholar who traveled into West Africa, he is often shocked at what he sees as pagan behaviors being just totally fine and acceptable, because the kings in West Africa were looking for opportunities to legitimize themselves and to bring the power of a new god into the prosperity, to bring prosperity to their people through the power of a new god. Whereas the common people are saying, hey, Sultan, if you want to convert to Islam, and if Allah is going to bless our people and make us prosperous, you be a devout Muslim. You do that, and that's going to be awesome. Me, I'm going to keep praying and continue my practices that honor the spirits of my land and my local gods, essentially, just in case Allah isn't strong enough to protect me and my family. And there wasn't the same kind of tension between those ideas in West Africa as you might expect from looking at it in other parts of the world. So Islam spreads widely, spreads in merchant communities, it spreads among the elite, but not necessarily among average everyday people. An exception, so as we're thinking about diversity, right, the spread of Islam in Africa, we can look at the diversity with the exception. Ethiopia in Northeast Africa had, by and large, adopted Christianity well before the 13th century, and maintained a cultural identity as a Christian empire, rather than widely adopting Islam in this particular time period that we are studying. So we have a continuity of Christianity in Ethiopia. We also see that as an example of diversity in East Africa. When we are thinking about Africa, it's really important to remember that Africa was connected to other parts of the world. I think too often a Eurocentric and 19th century, especially, view of Africa is very isolated, very apart from the rest of the world, but that is not at all the case in the 13th century. Mr. Beckman is going to talk about the Trans-Saharan trade networks that spanned across North Africa and into West Africa. He's going to talk about the Indian Ocean trade network and the connection of East Africa into that trade network. East Africa was not like a peripheral side character in the Indian Ocean. It was a major player economically. But even trade within Africa is also really significant. In Southern Africa, a notable culture from this time period that you probably, hopefully, have heard of is Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe, for a lot of European archaeologists for a very long time, was this mysterious ruins in Southern Africa. But later archaeological studies that finally got around to actually asking the question of, like, how did people in this place live and thrive and what were their connections, realized that this was a bustling trade location that provided a bridge between the east coast of Africa and more of the central interior regions, and that people would come to Great Zimbabwe to trade. Goods from all over the world are reflected in the archaeology of that space, because African kingdoms understood the value and significance of trade and made it a major part of their connection to the rest of the world. Likewise, anytime we're talking about trade, we want to acknowledge the intellectual transfer, the ideas that move, as well as the goods. So we see, along with the spread of Islam, we see knowledge and ideas and sciences and technologies spreading into new parts of Africa. Intellectual transfer is nothing new in Africa. If your teachers talk to you at all about the Bantu cultures in Africa, you might know about an event from much, much earlier in world history, the Bantu migrations, where a cultural group from West Africa spread throughout sub-Saharan Africa, so Central Africa, Southern Africa, even East Africa, bringing with them knowledge of things like ironworking and other technologies that proved to be really effective and important. Oh, goodness. I am still looking at time and realizing I got to skip another one. And I had a really good, another Ibn Battuta quote for you. But time-wise, we're just going to jump into Europe and get some good vocab going here. And maybe I'll just talk faster in the next stream. We'll see. If we're thinking about Europe, we are going to think about the continuity of beliefs and practices relating to Christianity. We should remember that Christianity was not the only religious tradition in Europe. There are significant populations of Jews, and in Spain, significant populations of Muslims in Europe. But by and large, Christianity is the dominant, overarching cultural idea that centers and focuses European culture. Just prior to the 1200s, we did have a split in Christianity. It's one of its first major splits. And so you see the Eastern Orthodox Christian ideas in places like the Byzantine Empire and Kievan Rus, and then the Western Catholic Christianity focused and centered in Rome, but more prevalent in Western Europe in particular. Politically, Europe is super fragmented during this time period. This is a period of decentralized government in Europe, which doesn't mean no government. It just means that Europe does not have the kind of unified empires that we see in places like China or the Inca or Mali in West Africa. Europe instead is decentralized. There are small royal houses, the feudal system that you may have talked about, which is a system that's based in relationships and loyalties, with loyalty traveling from the bottom of the social structure up to the top, and then protection traveling from the top of the social structure down to the bottom. Europe's economy is primarily agricultural, like most of the rest of the world. But if we think about like Song Dynasty China, with commercialization and innovation and manufacturing and production, we don't see as much of that during this period in European history. Most of Europe's economics outside of trade with other regions is agricultural production or limited manufacturing production in Europe itself. And Europe's labor system balances on both free and coerced labor. And so free labor, these are people who are working either for themselves. So small family farms would be an example of free labor. So people who maybe aren't making wages for their labor, but are producing goods that they then can either consume or sell to others on their own behalf in order to get the other kinds of goods or products that they need. Coerced labor, which includes serfdom in Europe, is labor that is forced and not compensated in a modern wage sort of system. And you're going to see that phrase coerced labor come up a number of times in your study of world history. So it's a good term that you should know. And then lastly, thinking about the influence of Islam in Europe, particularly with like that intellectual transfer, that transfer of knowledge from the ancient Indian or ancient Greek worlds through Dar al-Islam into Spain and then into Christian Europe because of interconnections and transfers of knowledge between Christians and Muslims in Spain. So this is just, like I said, it's a world tour. It is a whirlwind. When the College Board calls this unit the global tapestry, the idea is that it's a lot of different knowledge from a lot of different places woven together to give us this picture of what world history is looking like from 1200 to 1450. So I want to invite you to join us for more practice on this. You got a couple of ways to do that. One of these is trivia practice. Fiveable is going to be hosting trivia events for every unit in world history, typically on the day after the cram stream for that unit. So our Unit 1 trivia practice will be tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. This slide should be in the slide deck with hyperlinks, but those, I'm sure that all those links are also going to be posted and sent out via social media and emails. So just be looking for access to those things so you can come join us on Fiveable. Should be an event in your Fiveable dashboard when you're logging in, and you can join us for trivia. This isn't necessarily like AP practice test, but it's good practice with some of the concepts and ideas, and maybe even some of that more specific vocabulary that I couldn't get to because there was so much that we needed to talk about today. I also want to invite you right after this session to keep the conversation going in Discord. Natalie is going to be hosting some time in Discord, talking about any other questions that you might have, things from Unit 1 that I skimmed over really fast, or that you want to bring up and get some support on. So jump on over to Discord as soon as we finish. But before you go, I've got one last poll that I want to ask you about. And I'm so glad Mr. Beckman is here in the chat because he'll get to see the results right away before I even send them to him. But if he's going to talk about trade and trade networks in our next stream, which trade network do you want to review most in the next session? Which one do you need the most support and help with? The Silk Roads across Eurasia, the Indian Ocean Maritime Network connecting Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, and East Africa, the Trans-Saharan Network across Northern Africa? Or are you really interested in spending some time in some of those regional networks that your textbook may or may not have given a lot of time to? Some of the regional networks and economic developments in Europe, in the Americas. What are some things that you are still wondering about? All right, votes have slowed down. So, Mr. Beckman, here you go. Here are the results of the poll. I mean, really, people want to learn about it all, but people are really interested in those regional networks, the Trans-Saharan Network, and then we got to give some love to the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean, because we would be doing a disservice if we didn't. All right. Thank you so much for being here today. That's our hour. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Beckman will be here for the next session.
So today we're looking at Unit 1. And as Melissa said on Saturday, I was in that session. If your teacher did or did not use the unit numbers for the units, if they didn't use those at all, like you might be Unit 2, what is that? Like my kids, I basically never say those. And they're not at a disadvantage. If your teacher used them all the time, you're also not at a disadvantage. So don't worry about that. This is how the curriculum is packaged for teachers to use, but it isn't the order that you need to do it in. And you'll see there's a lot of overlap. Any way that you do a world history class, there is going to be some overlap. Meaning there's events that are happening at the same time that you're not going to cover, in the same week even. So this topic here is on networks of exchange. So it'll include a lot of the things from Saturday's stream, which you can watch archived with your cram passes. Let's take a look here and see what people think about springtime. It looks like it is pretty evened up. Yep, we got, right. No snow in some places. Some people don't even experience spring. This one time I lived in California, and I got to tell you, it didn't really have the seasons like I was used to. So there we go. Take a look. Taking a look here at our next slide. You should all think 5. Oh, this is the one I have to show. So just a note that this is being recorded and will be published different places. In fact, I just recommended a cram. Well, those are more of a review. It wasn't part of the official cram package, but from last spring that's on the site from Jed, who has a lot of really good advice on multiple choice questions. So those of you in my class, that came out over the Google Classroom. So just so you know, if you ask a question, your name will appear on the screen. If you want to change your chat name to something, to change your identity, that's always an option. Fiveable is available across the social media platforms, and there's even more than this out there, I'm told. So you might, you might give something like that a look. Okay. And here's what we have coming up. So this Saturday, Melissa will be streaming again with Unit 3, which is land-based empires from 1450 to 1750. And then I'll be back in the following week for Unit 4. I wound up with the connections ones, which is just kind of how it happens. We pick dates, that worked best for us. So I'll be back on the 18th to take a look at connections between places. So that's like transoceanic connections, things what it's officially called. There'll be a lot of sailing talk. And then we'll see coming back then for Unit 5 the following week. So just keep it coming. And after every stream, the party just rolls into Discord. Some people call that the after party. So you're at the party. We also invite you to come to the after party in Discord. And then finally, the links are live in the slides that get shared as part of the stream. But there are trivia, practice, competition, good times going on, as you can see there. And so the one that relates to this unit's content will be tomorrow. at a reasonable time for the West Coast peeps. Maybe a little, getting really edging onto my bedtime. I mean, in Central Time, I'm okay, but you know, I know you kids stay up a little later. So take a peek there. The good thing about trivia, has anyone done trivia? Maybe share your trivia responses. The good thing about trivia from a like psychology, like brain functioning standpoint, is you're practicing recalling. I mean, the thing to remember is that when you take the test, you're going to need to remember information. So anything you could do to practice recalling is all right. As long as you don't beat yourself up if you don't know everything, because you don't have to know everything, but you have to know something. And so this is a good way to practice what you know. Okay. We're going to take a look at an image now. So now we're going to dig in. Here is a keynote image that I have for you. And I'd like you to go ahead and put some answers into the chat. It's a famous image. It's one of the, you know, history of the world in 100 objects. So in this case, this is a collection of objects. Today I learned that sherds is actually a word. That's not just misspelled shards. I changed it first, then searched the internet, changed it back. Sherds is like shards, but for pottery. So what does this tell us? Yes, it is. Yeah, thank you. We are rolling. I believe the stream is starting. We got a question in there. Rika, can you all hear me? Like, I've not done this. Yeah. Right. It's not. Someone had porcelain up. Right. Yeah, but it's okay if you think of where this might be, right? So we have trade. This is networks of exchange. Right. Very good. Yeah, right. And where's the porcelain from? It looks like somebody had it there. Now, where was this porcelain found? All right. Yeah. Well, yeah, glazes and stuff too. Yeah, it's good. It's happening. The porcelain, you know, as I tell the students, when you have the name of a product that's also the name of your country, you know you have it on lockdown. So people in English, the English language calls this stuff China. It's like, well, I think we have it going on. They did, but not yet. Yep, the porcelain is a big Chinese export. That's going to be a continuity, to use some of our language from last week, and it made its way all the way to East Africa. Okay, and so how do we know that it's from China? Well, it resembles other artifacts from China, and also there's some scientific testing that can be done on materials like this now to look for radioactive signatures. I only barely know what that means, but there are chemical tests that can be done and determine that the clay and the materials used in this are from China or are similar to ones from China. Yeah, there we go. So here's what we're going to do. One of the things that I like to do with cram reviews and with, well, even with other reviews is to look at the powerful vocabulary for a particular topic. So I'm going to start there. At the end of the stream on, at the end of the stream, we're going to take a look at, or excuse me, at the end of the stream on Saturday, people identified regional trade networks as the thing that got the highest votes at the end. And so I thought I would go ahead and we could take a look at that here. I'll only spend a little bit of time on what that means. I think once you know, it'll put some minds at ease. And then we'll mostly focus on the 3 networks that you have to know, and then the Mongols. Okay, we ready? All right. Now those pottery sherds did not show the Silk Road, so we'll see if we can get which one it is. All right. Here is the big idea, which comes from the College Board website, or really from their course and exam description. So we're going to be looking at deepening and widening. So networks of human interaction within and across regions. So that's that regional trade networks, which contributed to cultural, technological, and biological diffusion. So let's go ahead and unpack that. Deepening means more goods traveling over the same routes. So these routes existed. It's a continuity. So that Silk Roads route that people know about, that would have existed prior to this time. But more goods will be traveling on it. Widening means that the reach of the networks is expanding. So East Africa was connected into the Indian Ocean trade route, but those pottery sherds are from Kilwa, so that's further south than had been regularly part of the routes in previous times. So that's what widening would mean. Okay. Within and across regions, so within the regions and between them, and then different kinds of diffusion. It's important to know that this is an interactive relationship, a reflexive relationship, each affecting each other with productive capacities. You always want to kind of pay attention to that, to how are more things being made. All right. So I'm going to put 4 power vocabulary terms up. So if you're taking any notes on the stream, these would be like the 4 things to get down and then kind of look for them. Now, what I mean by power vocabulary are terms that come from the key concepts and are the kinds of things that can wind up in questions, or they can wind up in answers. So the first one is the cornerstone for this, which is exchange networks. So that means exchange networks are things which connected societies. And I saw when, which trade networks came up, then we're looking at, the question is, people have some answers, right? So you should know some of those. You should know the places that they connected. So an exchange network. A network means it's more than just a point to point. It makes a net or like a web. So there's multiple places being connected. And then exchange means it's more than just trade, although trade's usually kind of at the heart of it. Exchange means there's other things are spreading. Ideas, organisms, goods are moving back and forth in some way. Ooh, a little over clicking there. Okay. Diffusion is an important word. And again, this is a word that could either be in a question or in an answer, or could be in the prompt for a free response question, or could be a word that you use in your answer. So what does diffusion mean? And how, why don't we in the chat there, anyone got some ideas? How is diffusion similar to, but how is it different from especially the idea of trade? So what does it mean when something diffuses? And you can use your science knowledge here. What do we mean by diffuse? If something's diffuse, yeah. We got some things coming in here. All right. Carolyn, we have it down here with from high concentration to low concentration. So that's kind of the science definition. It's how things spread. Yeah, right. And then how is that different from trade? Like what makes it different from trade? Yeah, all those things do. Carla's got some good ideas in there. Right. Yeah, it might syncretize, it might not. There's everything always syncretizes. Like I said this in the chat on Saturday when this came up, but like all religions are syncretic. So, in some way, like all of them. Okay. So there we are. So trade, yeah, is limited to items. That's right. Yep. Good. We have some people are getting some ideas. So diffusion is when things spread. And the important thing to know is that then the things stay in the new place. They don't come back. It's not, or they might, but that's not the same as trade. It's not moving around. Like Islam spreads to Southeast Asia and there's mosques there right now. We have that, bananas diffuse from Southeast Asia to Africa. And there's, the bananas that people are eating in Africa are grown in Africa. They're not traded. They're not trading bananas. It doesn't really start to happen until like the turn of the 20th century. All right. Here's our next power term then is commercial practices. You might be able to think of a couple examples of these. Commercial practices refers to like business techniques or the way that people conduct commerce. And what might be an example of those? It's good to have like a little string of examples you can use. And you never need to know all of them, but it's always good to know some. Yeah, what are some examples? You can like put a... Yeah, there we are. Well, that would be an example today, right? Commercial practices. I would say there's things about Amazon, I assume you mean Amazon.com, that would be a commercial practice. I would say using coerced labor is a labor system and not a commercial practice, although you might be able to massage it in there. It's a kind of labor system. Commercial practice usually is about commerce, exchange. Yeah, and you might also kind of do it the other way. Oh, there we are. Banking houses. That's good. Flying cash. I see there. That's going to come up. All right. So we have some ideas, right? So if you want to go real old school on the barter, keep it coming. Okay, good stuff. So we're going to be looking for those. And then transportation technologies. So we're thinking about both land and sea, and often navigation is lumped into it. Okay. I would say Hanseatic League, Victoria, is an example of a regional trade network. And it's a good example of that. However, the Hanseatic merchants were conducting their affairs. So that could be if they were using any kind of accounting system, or if they were extending credit to each other. Those would be commercial practices. If they were only using coins, if they were using some kind of paper. Okay. So with transportation, we're looking at maritime and land. That word maritime is really useful. Lots of uses. Yeah. Credit cards are a modern form of commercial practice. Thank you, Erica. Okay. So here we go. We're going to take a look at some examples, and you can see if you can identify what it is, and then we'll guess which one of these it illustrates. So does anyone know what that is? Do you think we see here? Okay, you can just put in the chat there. Yeah, which I don't know what is this? Yeah, kind of nice, right? So then we have the yeah, it is a saddle for camels. Now there's like 9 different kinds of these because you got multiple humps. It depends on where it goes. There's a lot of camel stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so this is an example of transportation technology. Now, with any of these things, you could always hook it into something else, I think, because the camel saddle technology did diffuse to other places. It spread, somebody invented it and it spread to other places. So, okay. Yeah, nice. Right? Caravan, that'd be another word. So you're always thinking of words that are a little more specific. If you could have a more technical category word, like here, transportation technology, and then you attach something specific to it, you're doing a good job. All right, here's another example. We're gonna go do 4 of these, so we'll go a little quicker as we go. Although I'm getting used to there's a little bit of a lag here. It's different than the immediacy of the Google Meet. So you take a look here. Somebody might even know what that is. And if you did that, right? Thank you, Maddie. Right. We go. Some of you know my tricks. Yeah. What kind of diffusion would you say this is? What has diffused here? Yeah. Religion. Thank you, Ava. Oh, weird. It is not Timbuktu, but it is super close. I'm going to count that, Michael, because there is something similar in Timbuktu, and Timbuktu is a noteworthy city. No, it's not contagious. Contagious diffusion would be like pathogens. I would say it is religious. Yeah, what kind of building is this? You know what this is? I can tell some of you do. He's still standing. Today I learned not just that sherds is a word. I also learned that those are it's palm tree wood that's in there, and it doesn't actually hold it up. It's just there for decoration, those wood things that stick out. You might have seen one of these. And it's also there for scaffolding so people can climb around on it to add fresh layers of mud to keep it healthy. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a mosque. Oh, yeah, right. Hey, this is a really hot tip there from Natalie TA. Thank you, Natalie. And that is that most picture questions are usually also text questions. So if you look at what it says, you can learn some things. This one doesn't help as much, though. This one you really do need to look at the picture and see what's happening. But often reading the text will get it done for you. Here, let's go ahead and vote on this one, because this is one where you might get a few different things. Oh, okay. I'm learning how to do polls. All right, there should be a poll. Nope, that's not the one I want. I want to archive that. I want to show this one. There we go. You can go ahead and vote. That'll give me an idea of how people are doing. I guess it kind of covers it up. But it's from 1349, and it's in what's today Belgium, which is in northwestern Europe, near France. Yeah, this might not be it. Don't worry. Just take your best shot with the voting. Yeah. It doesn't. Oh, boy. Oh. How about now? Can you see the poll? There's like a lag, and I got it. Oh, no. This is what you call this user error. They are coffins. Thank you, Michael. But I think I overreacted, and I thank you, Natalie. Then I unhit it, so it might pop up. You can just put the answers in the chat. Yeah, sorry about that. It's my bad. Yeah, if it is diffusion, then think about what it is. Thank you, Natalie. Natalie is she's putting the A in TH, and she's assisting me. I need that. Could really kind of use like an army of TAs, like just a small, really like a platoon. Honestly, not a full army. Yeah, we got that. Contagious. Yeah, what's diffusing here? Right. Yeah. Ooh, Black Death. Thank you. I don't even know if I showed this picture in class. Did I, Alex? Yeah, this is biological diffusion, and it shows that. Although it is, Belgium was in a regional trade network that, spread the. So if you had trade exchange network, that's not wrong. I think that's good, and diffusion is probably the best answer. But exchange networks is also true, because otherwise, how does this stuff get there? Yeah, I didn't. All right, I got one more, and then we'll move forward, and then we'll get some other. Yep. Be part of the Black Death, which is also called the Second Plague Pandemic. All right. Now this is one where you have to read the script here. So I'll read that in case it's small. What this is a memorial for the first king of the Majapahit Empire, which was based in Java in Southeast Asia. And he was deified in death as half Shiva and half Vishnu. Well, I've recently learned that people say Shiva, so I'm going to try to do that. Shiva and Vishnu, which is a pretty bold combination to go into the afterlife fused together with. Right. Yeah, but what kind do we have here? This one, I think we might get a few different things. Yep, right. There you go. Thanks, Erica. So you have to know a little bit. Yep. Yep, diffusion. This would be cultural. Right. I traded out some of my images, and I wound up with one too many diffusions probably. But diffusion is really important, because sometimes people will think that it's trade, and we have the religious and the biological. Okay, great. We are perfectly on time here. Yep, so this would be Hinduism, but Buddhism did become more popular in Southeast Asia. Rulers would often take on Indic, you can say, like as India in general. Indic mythology, pantheon, to use those gods as a way to buttress their own authority. In traditional Hinduism, which just really means the beliefs of people from India, leaving India is not encouraged. However, that this is a long time ago. Think all these religions change. All religions are syncretic. They all evolve. And so there's not as much diffusion of Hinduism as a faith, but because of these networks, Hindu ideas did make their way to Southeast Asia, and then rulers would adopt them as a way to legitimize their authority. So you're like, I founded an empire, and you want to know why it's powerful? Because I am Shiva and Vishnu. And we do that. So this is not Buddhism, but Hinduism and Buddhism are related, and Buddhism definitely spread to Java. Now, today, Java is home to many Muslims. So that's another layer of the exchange that came later. Okay. All right. So at the end of the stream on Saturday, Melissa asked, what were people most interested in learning about? And when regional came up as like a trade network, there was, Silk Roads and Trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean, standbys, classics. And so people asked about that. So I thought one way to think about what's meant by regional, thank you, Erica. What's meant by regional is it's going to be in between local. So if you think of a local exchange network, that's like a marketplace, like a farmer's market. People go and they buy and sell things at the market. What a regional network means then is connecting networks across, obviously a larger region. So within those AP regions, so there is trade happening inside of those. And that's important because some of those regions are quite large. And the wealth that develops from that regional trade will often be what elites use to purchase luxury goods from other regions. So to think about, someone said banking houses before, and banking houses were something that was happening in Europe at this time, at the end of the Middle Ages, and some merchants and bankers were making, bank, quite literally. And so they had extra money that they could use to buy goods. And so they're buying things like cloves from all the way in South Asia and China, or Chinese porcelain or silks, or those kinds of things. So the same things would be happening in other places where, like in China, for instance, you have this large internal market, which leads to profits and surplus. And some of that stuff's exported, and it also leads to people purchasing goods from other places. All right. And then interregional, what interregional means is that it is obviously between regions. And so those are the ones that get the starring, they get the names because they have another name that isn't the region. Like trading within Europe is European. And then someone said Hanseatic League before. That's a term that some of you might know, which is in the Baltic Sea. So that's like a, sub-regional network. It's within one part of Europe, northeastern Europe. All right, so here's a way to think of it. If we take a look at this. So this is a map of trade networks from the, just before our time period that we're looking at. So that one that's circled there, would we call that local, regional, or interregional? No, interregional is bigger. Interregional is between regions. Yeah, thank you. Oh, Melissa, yay. So we see that. So this would be a regional trade network because it shows connections between places. Now, sometimes the difference between regional and interregional isn't necessarily the size of it, because if we look at this next here, I guess that's a little bit bigger. Yeah, and our continents and our regions are a little bit random. Or not by random, they're a little arbitrary. So are there similarities or differences? And there's similarities or differences within these regions that might be as big as, between the regions. And I think the classic example is right here, and that's the Mediterranean Sea. The area around the Mediterranean is in 3 different regions, according to the College Board, but there's really going to be a lot of similarities, also differences in between those areas. It's just a way to help you understand what might be meant if you see the word regional in a question. Really, oh, thank you, Kayla. And she names the regions. That is good. And what you see here is that it is, kind of the same size. Or if we were to put one in China, which is quite large, we would have that, right? So interregional. Again, this is to help you understand the questions. Now, one way that you might get, yeah, thanks, Maddie. So if we take a look at this slide here, then, one way that this fits into these power vocabulary words that we're using is that commercial practices are often associated with particular regions, not necessarily interregional, because there needs to be some sort of agreement, or at least this is just one way to think of it, some sort of agreement amongst the merchants over what is, or what are the rules of the game. And there's usually some sort of state power. So this is a picture of flying cash. Here's a term that you might have heard, which is also another word for paper money or banknotes. And this is from the Song Dynasty. And so it's, this is pretty old money right here. And there's some other examples there that you might know. You can ask, have you heard of those? Which ones of those did you read about in your book or cover in your class? Can you attach the regions for like SOC or bills of exchange? Sometimes bills of trade. Where some of those are from. You go ahead. Yeah. There we go. In a region, there's yeah, so where? None? Okay, well this is one of those things. So for Katie there, where you would, getting one down is going to help you. So flying cash is a term that was used. And you can see on the top of this how there's an image of coins. So this is how many coins this is supposed to be. The Mongols did use, the Mongol Dynasty, and I guess some of the other Mongol states, did use paper money. Yep. So it's going to be back. So these are commercial practices, and what they're going to allow is more trade over larger distance. But they tend to be more regional because there has to be agreement, and there's often like a common state. Like this is from the Song Dynasty that's there. Plus, remember, like that porcelain we saw from China in the first slide, that didn't travel in one trip from China all the way to East Africa. It probably made several stops. So there's probably multiple commercial practices along the way, different kinds of buying and selling and trading and things like that. Okay. Yeah, well, the thing with China, right, they made paper, so they're going to get to paper money before some other people. Plus, there's this large internal market. The story with flying cash is that the merchants, like their horses were getting bruises on them from all the copper coins they were carrying. And so this was a way to do that. So it's easier to carry. It's easier to carry this. No, this diffusion would be, so if you think of, this is a commercial practice. What would be diffusion, though, is when these different ideas of paper money, when they spread to other places. Okay? It's called flying cash. There's an expression. That's why it's in quotation marks. And if you called it paper money, you'd be just fine. Though the flying part is that it could be used across greater distance. Right. Yeah. So, right. Like if you were to take this bill to the other end of the Silk Roads, you wouldn't be able to get anything for it. That's what makes it regional. So then you can, but within China, they called it that because then you could carry more of it. Like literally, there was so much commerce in China that the use of coins was becoming physically difficult to move the amount of coins it took to buy things. All right. So these would be some terms that you might, jot down. Again, you're not going to be in a situation where you have to know all of them, but you would be in a situation maybe where you'd use one as an example. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these inter-regional exchange networks. So inter-regional is where we're going to see more of these transportation technologies. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, the flying cash, Hannah, would probably only be of use in China. I don't really know. That'd be an interesting question over time. It would carry on. China. China for flying cash. Yeah. No, it's not a compass. Oh, somebody knows. Let's see if we can. There we go. Those are different ways. There weren't really currencies yet, Samir. No, it's okay to ask that question with the commercial techniques. So they would function in different places, and they would usually denote how much of a hard currency they were worth. Again, that's part of why it's regional. So on that Chinese banknote, I think it had 8 copper coins up there. It's like, that's how much this is. So a check or a sock in the Middle East, someone would write down, this is worth such and such number probably of silver coins. And in Europe, maybe gold coins. Yeah, this is an astrolabe. Nice work, kids. It is, right? So when we look at inter-regional networks, we're looking at transportation technologies. So it's useful to separate those out, I think, into maritime and land-based. So maritime means sea. Yeah, and it's okay if you don't know what this is, but some people probably studied it. So these are terms for ships from China and from the Western Indian Ocean, respectively, that you might use. Yeah, the way that, well, I'll tell you what the astrolabe worked when I put it up on the thing here. And then there's also, these are all navigation. So this is the middle one, the astrolabe. And people would use it for determining the angle that the sun or another heavenly body, something in the sky was at. So the angle that the sun is at is going to tell someone where they are on the globe in terms of latitude, like north or south or distance from the equator. Okay. You could use it, I think, by keeping track of the sun. It's really just a way of getting like an angle, like measuring that. Right. Yep. Yep, Emily has it. Of course, you could go full Polynesian, just use your hand, but this would be for people who need instruments. Okay. These other things also, so these are also examples of diffusion because they spread between regions. So the astrolabe was something that existed in the Mediterranean regional trade and then later diffused or spread into the Indian Ocean and would have diffused across the Indian Ocean. Same thing, compass and rudder, at least the stern posted rudder, are both Chinese originally, and they diffuse across the Indian Ocean in the other direction. So eventually we'll see when I do my Unit 4 where we get some mashups of these things. I mean, I imagine. I think that probably would have had multiple uses. And then with land, the big thing we were looking at is, of course, the camel saddle. All right. Now, for the last 20 minutes, we're going to take a look more closely at these 4 networks. This is the other thing that you might find useful to write down. And I'll have these words on the slides when they come up again. So you don't necessarily need to scroll this down at top speed right now. But when you look at each of these routes, these trade networks, one of the things I noticed looking at the course and exam description is that there's going to be some component of geography you should know, like what's the human environment interaction that is affecting this. What's being exchanged? You should be able to name some trade goods, and also some other kinds of diffusion, cultural, biological, technological. And you should be able to name some of the societies that were involved. So we say Silk Roads, like who's involved? Like, oh, China. So you would do that. All right. So go ahead and take a look at these. So for each one, I have these same 3 bullets up, and then we can see. Think so. What's the big geographic feature as in terms of the human environment interaction when we talk about the Indian Ocean? I say Indian Ocean, and you say what? Ooh, random capitalization there. Didn't mean to go like Indian, like Indiana. Right on. Right. And what is useful about the monsoon winds? Way to get there first with monsoon, Kayla. I bet other kids knew that fast. Well, there are, because if you think of the world's 4 biggest religions, or 5 biggest religions, they're mostly going to all diffuse through the Indian Ocean. There's Christianity a bit, but certainly Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism, Sikhism to some degree will diffuse in that area, right? Makes traveling faster. And remember, the thing with the monsoons is, the thing with the monsoons is, you see those 2 arrows on there? The thing with the monsoons is, for part of the year, they blow consistently in the same direction. And so it's predictable, and they change direction. So you can use them to go somewhere, and then if you wait, you can come back. And what it allowed is, if you see on the map here, like this route here across the Indian Ocean, where they're not right up against the land, like people would not, the ships weren't big enough. There wasn't enough supplies in the ships for a crew to go from here all the way to southwestern India and get lost and have everyone survive. Like, they had to know that they could head out and that the wind would consistently blow in that direction. And so then that allowed them to take these shorter cuts. So with the monsoon winds, what do people have to do once they get to where they're going before they come back? Yeah. Yes, it does. So monsoon pattern. Now, when the monsoon can also refer, so in world history, when we talk about monsoon winds, we're talking about the pattern of the winds. Now, in India and other Southeast Asian societies, when people talk about the monsoon, they mean when the rain comes. Because what happens is, the winds, when it's blowing toward India, is going across the Indian Ocean, and it's picking up moisture, and it's real hot. And it gets there, and eventually the winds are blowing. They're blowing toward the Himalayas, and then when they get to the Himalayas, it's cold, and the water vapor condenses, and it rains, like, a lot. So that's what the monsoon is, that rain. But in world history, when we say that, we're more interested in the pattern of winds, and it's people understanding how to use them. So people mentioned religion. So you would want to know some religions that spread here. Buddhism and Islam would be the 2 most important religions that spread through, or the most effect spreading through the Indian Ocean. You'd also want some products. So you have some goods, so like India with cotton textiles, and China with porcelain, silk textiles, ivory, the finer spices from over here in this area in far Southeast Asia. Okay, and then which societies are there? So as you're going through your chart, then you might just add some of those things in. Ooh, Gujarat, that is nice. So Gujarat is the part of India that's in the more northern part, northwest India, and it's a prime trading area, and still has been for a long time. Okay. So you'd have some societies. You could name some of the places in India. The Swahili coast would come in here. Southeast Asia, you might name an empire or 2, like the Khmer Empire or the Majapahit Empire. But again, remember, it's always the case you don't have to know everything if you can think of something there. Yep, that's right. That's right. I mean, Kayla's got Swahili. All right, let's do another one. Ooh, yep, Strait of Malacca is going to be part of that. So with the Silk Roads then, what kind of geographic factors might come into play here? Ooh, yeah, Srivijaya, that's a good one. Shivani. Okay. BR, right. What's the land like? Yeah, so like a... Well, the map shows the locations, but yeah, I'm not, Silk routes would go a long time before the Mongols. Mongols capitalize on that. So for locations for Indian Ocean, you're looking at East Africa, Middle East, India, like all the coasts of India, which are of course going to be different societies, and then Southeast Asia. And China is connected in. The monsoon wind pattern actually affects the South China Sea too, so it'll make trading in and out of China easier. Yeah, the temperatures can be really extreme here. Yep, and horse saddles developed sooner than camel saddles, which, turns out the horse a little easier to domesticate than the camel. Not quite as big, not quite as mean. So you got that. Oh, yeah. Now, what's a caravanserai, Emily? That is from way downtown. That's an expression, kids, for a basketball shot made from a long distance. So we have a caravanserai is a classic example of something where you could see that environmental effect. Because caravanserais were areas that were used for people to stay over, and their animals could be there, but they were like big courtyards. Yeah, right. Kayla's got the idea in the chat there, but that's because of the hot, dry, windy climate that you'd need shelter from the winds in order to stay safe in those places where you could rest. And so setting those up was important. Okay. So we have this. There are mountains to avoid. You can see, like on the map here, up the Tibetan Plateau, there's not much going. There's some blank spots. There's also some deserts where there's blank spots, where people aren't traveling. So we see that. In terms of exchange, we have religions, again, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam would be the biggest ones on the Silk Roads. And then a lot of students seem to here tonight seem to have camel parking lot. I like that. Seem to have some knowledge about some of the other diffusion, like gunpowder and paper from China. Yes, the plague did spread along this route. The plague bacterium, Yersinia pestis, is sort of indigenous, has lived in rodents in Central Asia for a long time. Now today it's, other things, it's been diffused. You can get the plague in the United States, but it's bacterial. So if you get antibiotics, you're okay. But, be careful with prairie dogs, kids, like more careful than you might have thought. Okay. There was some Christianity spread on sea routes too, especially in the Mediterranean. And later when we get to the global age, into the Americas, sea travel there. But Christianity would have spread here more across, I think, the land route. So you should know that Christianity in the East, too, is different. They call it Church of the East. It's not totally different. It's still Christian. So Jesus as the Christ, the anointed one. But there are some differences. Okay. So we're also looking at societies. We have our kind of anchor societies here, China, and then the Mediterranean societies, so like the Islamic caliphates. Then you have all these trading cities in between. Okay. I'm not sure what you mean by which order, Erica. These things are all happening at the same time, so we could kind of do them in any order. The bubonic plague, a plague would have spread during the Columbian Exchange too, but that's going to be later. No, the Crusades comes much later, and there have been Christians in that part of the world for a long time. Oh, I see. This here is, I screenshot it. This is like, yeah, 1200. Yep, those things are true. But the plague is part of it. It's just not one of the ones that has the biggest demographic effects when we do Unit 4. So Christianity, there's merchants and missionaries who spread the religion across trade routes like the Mediterranean trade, regional trade network, and then out across the Silk Roads, and then adopted by some monarchs in Europe and especially, and then enforcing that amongst their subjects. Okay. Yeah, the Black Death was a name that was given slightly later for the bubonic version of the plague that was so deadly in Europe during this spread. It's probably the deadliest pandemic in history. Samarkand for the win. Thank you, Michael. Knowing a couple trading cities could be useful as well. Kashgar. So just knowing that there's also city-states in between. So when we look at societies, it's not just big empires like Song China, but also, city-states like Samarkand that were sometimes part of larger empires and sometimes not. Okay. All right, so Silk Roads are related to the Mongols. Oh yeah, that would be a good one there. Srikar's got Baghdad. Okay. So, in some ways, we can look at the Mongol Empire that because it's the Mongols is so big that it's an interregional network. What I mean by that is some of the things that we looked at with the regional networks with one state creating like common rules and facilitating trade, that is something that was more characteristic of a regional trade route. It's just that when you're the Mongol Empire, your region is Eurasia. So it gets quite large. So this has just got a little bit of a Temujin would later go by Chinggis Khan. And some of this is about military organization. So these details that are coming up now are not essential. Yeah, the Mongols is fun to talk about. There's just, I don't know what it is. It just is. It's endlessly fascinating. So these are things that were innovations that allowed them that were part of their conquest. But then some of these other things are ways that they encourage commerce. By creating a common law code across this large area, or especially regions of the area, that's going to encourage commerce. Islam does the same thing, by the way. So when Islam spreads, one of the reasons or one of the benefits for adopting Islam from a merchant's point of view is they're in a common ethical framework with other merchants. And so the Mongols do that secular law, right? Oh yeah, good stuff there. So then all these other things are things that are going to encourage exchange. Now, most famously, you should know that the Mongol Empire encouraged exchange because they promoted trade. They didn't allow, or they had tried to keep individual cities or individual rulers or criminals from stopping trade. So, if I was a bandit and the Mongols told me to knock it off, I might update my resume. You know what I'm saying? Kind of get there in the job market, see what's going on. So it kind of encouraged that. Of course, the Mongols themselves also, destroyed a lot of things. When they burned Baghdad, that's going to put commerce back a little bit. So it's complicated. Yes, Shivani, they're generally speaking religiously tolerant because as nomads, they'd interacted with people within Mongol ruling families. You'll see multiple religions. There'll be like Kublai Khan's wife, who's a Christian, but then, he might also have, he's got some Muslim nephews who are ruling the Ilkhanate. So there's no like religious dogmatism going on. All right, one more network here for us. Let me see. So that's the Trans-Saharan Network. Now we got good hints in the name, and that's so what's the geography situation here? And this is one where a lot of students know the main exchange. Yeah, so what was the main exchange? Or like what are the big trade exchange goods? Yeah. Yes. If you associate Mali, kingdom, or empire with this, that is really good to know. That will work. There's also, because the Ghana Empire that came before that is outside the time period. Mali is, smack at the beginning of the time period. Yep, there was that. So salt and gold. But no, there's also a lot of ideas, religion and Arabic writing and learning will diffuse also. I'm not sure there was a slave trade here in the Trans-Saharan trade. I guess it's really worth saying that there would have been human trafficking along all of the trade routes that we're looking at. And there's always textiles. Oh, King Dan of Denmark, who was like a real all-star in these chats last year and is a TA now, he would say the answer is always textiles. Like you can almost always answer textiles. It's not totally wrong with that. Yeah. So there would have been trafficking, trade and enslaved people, but it would not have been like this trade network is not necessarily overrepresented in that. There are a lot of humans being trafficked as slaves in the Mediterranean and the Black Seas, as example, and across the Silk Roads and in the Indian Ocean. It's happening in a lot of places. Okay. So exchange here, I would say the gold salt trade is what's kind of the wheels of this, moving it along. And then the diffusion of Islam and Arabic learning. And then for societies, yes, Mali Empire would be good. Okay. I will make one quick note of this here as another network. And just to know that this isn't in the official course and exam description, but I think it's also important for students to know that exchange wasn't only an Afro-Eurasian thing. Plus, we got this quote here from Robert Strayer. Who the Strayer heads out there? The Zimbabwe, in Africa, is in southern Africa, and the gold from Zimbabwe would have gone into the Indian Ocean networks off the Swahili coast. So Great Zimbabwe, Ethiopia are two more real good examples for this time period. So I have this here. Yeah. Did you use Strayer? Yeah, I guess, Natalie. Yeah. Ways of the World, that's the one. So just to know that there are things moving around, and really the best example of that is another one of the world history 100 objects. I started with one and I'm closing with another. So around here we see this amazing double-headed serpent. College board, could take exchange in the Americas out of the curriculum, but they're going to, they'll be buying this turquoise double-headed serpent from my cold dead hands. Oh, the earth and its peoples. And that covers everything like that. So you see here that the turquoise is from what's today southwestern United States, but the shells are from somewhere else. There's also beeswax and conch shells for the teeth. So the materials in this come from all these places coming together, showing that exchange. All right. For the next, nice. What look through your textbook is go back to that chart that I made or the power vocab and just look for examples. Look for examples of these things. What you really want to do is be able to take things you already know a little bit and attach them to a concept that you can use in writing or that you can recognize if you're doing a multiple choice question. So this has been delightful, and I'm excited to come back and do transoceanic connections. We'll take our maritime technology global. So as always, go ahead and stay in touch across the socials. Lots of good stuff. And keep it going in Discord. I know that Natalie will be in there helping everybody out. And I've had a really great time. So I'm going to go ahead and Oh, before I stop, no, I'm going to try to do this poll thing again because I did have a poll set up for the, let's see if this opens there. You know, if the poll comes up. No, I'm going to try here. This is for Melissa for next time. Thank you. It's been really nice seeing you. I enjoyed talking to some of you in the chat before. You bring your questions. And if questions up in Discord, Natalie will tell Melissa or me, whoever's streaming next, and you can say, I really want to know about this. And if other kids want to too, we'll shape that. I did that whole regional thing based on the feedback from there. Yeah. Well, good to see you, Alexa, or your name and your generic face, smiley face there. Yes, thank you, Anna. I feel like there's been some polling fail on my end. So we'll just see. You can pop off in the Discord about which of the land-based empires you are interested in knowing about. So, all right. Bye-bye. Have a good night, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing so I can wave it out. Yay. Yay. And I'm going to end the stream.